Okay, just for a second, I want you to imagine something. You're standing in a forest, say, 12,000 years ago. And here's the kicker. You are taller, stronger, and healthier than almost anyone you'd meet today. You don't answer to a king, you don't pay taxes, and your freedom, well, it's measured by how far you can walk. For 97% of all human history, this was just normal. This was us. But then, in what's really a geological blink of an eye, the whole pattern just broke. We love to think of civilization as this grand leap forward, this story of progress. But the bones of our ancestors, they tell a much darker story of a survival strategy that ended up becoming a gilded cage.
And you can see it right here. On one side, you've got a hunter-gatherer from the Upper Paleolithic. And when you look at their skeletons, these people were in incredible physical shape. Their bones were dense, and their average height was something modern Europeans wouldn't hit again until like the 20th century. Now look at the other side, an early farmer. Their bones are just riddled with signs of repetitive stress. Their spines are compressed, and on average, they were several inches shorter. This is the whole point right here. The very first steps we took towards civilization were also the first steps toward a massive decline in our individual health.
And this is a fact that you just have to sit with for a minute. For the vast, overwhelming majority of our time on this planet, we were a species that lived in this quiet balance. We left no scar on the earth heavier than a footprint in the mud. The whole world we know now, cities, countries, agriculture, it's all a tiny, really recent, and pretty radical experiment.
So what did that old world actually look like? Well, socially, these groups were fiercely egalitarian. They worked in what's called an immediate return economy. Basically, you ate the food right after you got it. So there was no way to store up wealth or for one person to monopolize resources, and that had a really clear political consequence. If some guy tried to get bossy and dominate the group, everyone else had the ultimate trump card. In a world without walls or borders, your ultimate freedom was simply the ability to turn around and walk away.
So what on earth could have changed a dynamic that worked for literally millennia? The trap, and this is the really counterintuitive part, wasn't sprung by some disaster or hardship. No, it all began with a period of sudden, almost seductive abundance.
So as the last ice age finally ended, the climate warmed up and stabilized. And in the Near East, this created a kind of perfect storm. Wild wheat and barley started growing in these incredibly dense natural fields. Huge herds of gazelle were migrating right through the valleys. For the very first time in human history, the energy you got from the land was way more than the energy you spent finding it.
And this is where we meet a people called the Natufians, and they give us this crucial clue that flips the whole story we learned in school on its head. We were all taught that people learned to farm and then they settled down. Well, the Natufians prove it was the exact opposite. They settled first. The wild food was so reliable that they built permanent stone houses and these heavy grinding stones, basically signaling we're staying put.
But staying in one place set off a kind of biological time bomb. See, for a mother who's always on the move, births are naturally spaced out, maybe every 4 or 5 years, because she can only carry one infant at a time. But in a settled village, that limitation just vanished. Birth intervals dropped to every 2 years, and suddenly, the population absolutely exploded. It grew way beyond what the wild environment could naturally support, and that was the first click of the lock.
This new reality really forced our ancestors into a corner, and it led them to make a great and kind of terrible bargain. They didn't really choose a new way of life, they were pretty much pushed into it.
So just as their population was peaking, the climate turned on them. A sudden cold snap, which we now call the Younger Dryas, hit the whole region. The forests pulled back, the grasslands got thin, and all that natural abundance that had made settlement possible just disappeared. But now they were too numerous to go back to being mobile hunter-gatherers. They were trapped. So what was their choice? What do you do? They couldn't go back, so they had to go forward. They had to intervene. They started clearing out competing plants, carefully selecting and sowing seeds, and managing the land. They adopted agriculture, not as some brilliant idea for a better life, but as a desperate strategy just to survive. And the cost of that bargain? Well, it was paid by the human body. This chart says it all. Look at that dramatic drop in average height. A diet that used to be incredibly diverse, all kinds of plants and animals, suddenly narrowed to a heavy, starchy reliance on just a few grains. We got a steady supply of calories, sure, but we lost all this crucial nutritional diversity. And the problems didn't stop there. Living in these dense communities, often right next to your domesticated animals, it was a perfect breeding ground for new diseases. Things like influenza and tuberculosis suddenly had a way to spread like wildfire. And the labor? That repetitive, soul-crushing work of grinding grain for hours and hours every single day led to deteriorated joints and compressed spines.
So when you boil it all down, this is the fundamental trade-off. We exchange the physical health and resilience of the individual for the reproductive success of the group. Farming could support way more people per square mile, even if each of those individual lives was shorter, way more fragile, and full of disease.
So once this new system was in place, it started to scale up. As we moved into the Great River valleys, places like Mesopotamia, the project wasn't just about managing plants anymore. It became about engineering the entire environment.
The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was unbelievably fertile, but it was also incredibly volatile. It was always swinging between terrible droughts and catastrophic floods. So to survive there, you needed canals, you needed embankments, and you needed coordinated labor on a scale that no single family could ever manage. And out of this necessity, a new kind of centralized authority emerged. In this new world, the people who controlled the water, they controlled life itself.
And at the heart of this brand new engineered system, cities just exploded. By 3800 BC, a place like Uruk had a population of up to 50,000 people. I mean, think about that. We're a species that evolved to live in small bands of maybe a few dozen. This was totally unprecedented. You couldn't govern a place like this with just personal relationships anymore. You needed institutions.
And the most common artifact from this whole period tells the story perfectly. Archaeologists have found millions of these things, these crude, kind of ugly, mass-produced bowls. These weren't for family dinners. They were standardized ration containers. Think of it as the ancient world's styrofoam cup, used to hand out a fixed daily amount of grain to the workers.
And this simple little bowl represents a really profound shift. The independent producer, who worked for themselves, was replaced by the dependent worker. Labor became an abstract concept. Food became compensation. The city's walls might have offered protection, but they also enforced permanence. Now, leaving this system meant abandoning your access to food itself.
You know, even our greatest intellectual achievement was born from this need for control. The first stories weren't epic poems or myths, they were spreadsheets. The earliest clay tablets from Iraq have no stories on them, they are records. The very first written symbols represent things like barley, sheep, and units of work. Writing began as accounting, a tool for administrators to manage resources and ultimately to manage people.
So, what was it actually like to live inside this fully formed system? To get a feel for it, let's spend a day in ancient Egypt, a civilization that pretty much perfected this model, and see the cage in its most complete form. Let's imagine it's 1250 BC in the city of Thebes. Your day starts at dawn. The women go to collect water from the Nile, the source of all life. By mid-morning, you're at work, maybe hauling massive stone blocks for a new temple to the pharaoh. Now, it's backbreaking, but you're not a slave. You're technically a paid worker. At noon, you stop for lunch, and it's almost always bread, maybe dipped in the thick, nutritious beer that everyone, even the kids, drinks because it's safer than the river water. Then, in the evening, you head back to your small, mud brick home for a simple dinner of, you guessed it, more bread and beer.
And this was the fundamental bargain that was offered to the common person. You give the system your total obedience. You give it your physical labor, often for these massive projects you will never ever see completed in your lifetime. And in exchange, what does the system give you? It gives you protection from chaos, it gives you a daily ration of bread and beer, and it gives you the promise of a proper burial, which was everything for ensuring your spot in the afterlife.
And this table here really shows the rigid structure that made it all work. At the very, very top, you had the pharaoh. He wasn't just a king, he was a living god, and his job was to guarantee Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth and balance. Just below him were the priests and the scribes, the all-important administrators who kept the records. And then, forming the huge base of the entire pyramid, were the farmers and laborers, whose work powered the whole thing.
Which brings us right back to our central question. The rise of civilization was a trade-off. There's no doubt about it. We gained the ability to create wonders, but it came at a profound cost to our individual freedom and our health. Life became meshed into these massive systems that demanded obedience and permanence. So, as we look back at the grain storehouses of Uruk and the Great Pyramids of Egypt, you have to ask yourself, did the very walls we built to protect ourselves also become our cage?